We're gonna take about another minute to see if anybody else jumps on here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so in case anybody else jumps on, I'll go ahead and admit them as they come. But thank you so much for tuning in today or joining us on Zoom to talk about the American and state degree applications. My name is Abby Johnson, Kansas FFA Vice President, and I'll merely be serving as a host today for this unpacking opportunity. Just as some basic information as we get started, this Zoom will be recorded and live streamed. So if you're joining us on Zoom, you can turn your camera off if that's something you're uncomfortable with. It's totally okay. We just want to make sure you are aware of that. And if you have any questions throughout this session together, please feel free to drop them in the chat or send them to me, and they'll be answered throughout the session or at the very end. So I'm really excited to be able to host this unpacking opportunity because applying for a state or American degree demonstrates the effort that FFA members put into their agricultural experiences and the outstanding leadership abilities and community involvement that they exhibit through their FFA career. Especially when it comes to the American FFA degree recipients, it shows a promise for the future of agriculture, which I think is really exciting because it showcases those young adults that have gone above and beyond to achieve excellence. I believe obtaining these degrees through the FFA career is an incredible accomplishment, and I'm very excited to introduce some guests today that are going to bring you this content. We have a few presenters with us, but I would first like to introduce you all to Ethan Goff to begin talking first about state degrees and then about American degrees. Ethan is a former Girard FFA member who is now a K-State agriculture education student. He is assisted in the review process for state and American degrees and is knowledgeable about the topic. So Ethan, I'm gonna pull up the slideshow for you, and then the floor is yours.
Awesome, thanks, Abby. So yeah, like she said, I work in the state FFA office under the executive secretary, Miss Mary Kane. And so come around every spring, I get the opportunity to look over and review both state and American degrees. Having both my state and American degree, I can attest just how important this is for students and just how well it shows how much they're invested into agriculture. And so this presentation is really just kind of over what those state degrees kind of look like for new advisors in the state, and also advisors that maybe have had some problems in the past of getting their degrees sent back for revisions, and just kind of how we can eliminate some of those more common issues that we've kind of found here in the state office. And so here's the link provided to the state FFA website. This link has the state degree sample. It also has the handbook and a bunch of other really cool documents there. I just put it in the chat for those of you that are on if you want to follow along with this. But for this presentation, I just kind of followed the format from that handbook and just kind of what the state degree would look like whenever you go to AET to find it. And so here's a picture of the degree handbook and just kind of the minimum requirements for it. So I think the first question that you need to ask your students, do you apply for this? And I'm not going to read through this list. Like I said, those documents are there, but it just kind of says the guidelines and kind of the baselines of what you need to have for your SAE, what you need to have invested in it, how many years, that kind of deal. It's pretty straightforward. So if you just need to know if your students do apply, please go to those documents on the state website. They're extremely beneficial. So accepted SAE programs for earning the state FFA degree. This is something that we kind of run into every once in a while. Is it considered a bona fide SAE is what the National FFA considers it. And so 5 factors for a quality SAE that we have found. Are they documented? Do they have well documentation of what the SAE consists of? Do they have record reports, stuff like that? Is it curriculum based? Does it kind of fall back into the ag sector? And I'll talk kind of more about which ones don't here in a minute. Are they student managed? Is this truly a student experience, or is this more of a family, or more than just the student itself? Does the student receive his recognition? Being student managed, the student should receive all the recognition for his or her work that they do by themselves. And lastly, they achieve high level skills that will carry on past their years in the FFA jacket and into the industry and career fields that they choose to go into. And so some of these non-accepted work experiences I was talking about just a minute ago is babysitting or childcare. Working in those centers is great for students and it's a great way to make income, but the ties that they have back to agriculture just aren't there for the state degrees and for those bona fide SAE requirements. Another one that's kind of along the same lines is housekeeping. Again, we just don't have those connections really back to agriculture. Working in a retail store with no portion of the job being ag related. We have had some in the past that work at Tractor Supply or Orscheln's or some of those more agriculture related stores, and they do get accepted. But whenever we think of more retail stores, we're thinking of like, for example, a Hibbett's or an Academy or something like that, where maybe those agriculture fields just really aren't there to be attainable. And last year we get a lot of these. This is a lot of kind of where this section kind of came into. It was working in a restaurant only involving waitressing. And we have had some in the past state degrees and even American degrees that have worked at restaurants, but they were on the food safety aspect side of it. It was more than just washing dishes and waiting tables and stuff like that. They were preparing food and they were being able to get to know that food security and that food safety sector. And then also on the picture on the right, it does talk about the difference between placement and entrepreneurship type SAEs, just to make sure that whatever your students choose to do, that they fit into these categories. We also have research, school-based enterprise, and service learnings as two. Those are not as common, but those are still widely accepted. And it's really cool whenever they come into the state office for me to be able to just kind of look through those and see what those students are doing outside of, those traditional placement or entrepreneurship SAE types. So here we kind of define SAE hours being unpaid. Sometimes whenever we look at those, the hours can get to be a hefty amount and we wonder kind of where they came from. And so the picture on the right really demonstrates, I think, a really good job of just kind of what a breakdown hours would look like for a student per year, filling in their sleep hours, years or hours that they obtain through school, all that kind of thing. And so they have what they say here is around just over 2,000 hours remaining in the whole year. And so if we have a student that is filling three-fourths of that, that's great, but we also might have some questions. And anyone that goes over that 2,000 hours, we will need to know documentation of why that student was putting in so many work hours, that kind of thing. For instance, there was a degree down in Riverton. He did a custom harvesting operation, went all the way from the southern part of the U.S. up to the north part, and he easily exceeded those hours, but he had all the right documentation and things to go along those lines that kind of showed us that he was still invested in his SAE. And on the right, it just kind of talks more about what will qualify for unpaid experiences and then also what will not qualify. We don't run into this a whole lot, but with the unqualified, just the leadership activities, sometimes people think of their SAE hours whenever they are supposed to be for their leadership activities and different things like that. And so just kind of reading through those lists and being able to determine, this is a part of my SAE, or maybe this is something that I can put towards the leadership roles, or maybe more community service driven or something like that, something more along those lines. So this is what you're going to get into after you do the introduction, put your name, advisors, get your signatures, all of that. And so on the left is just kind of the basic rundown of, what is your SAE type? And then this is where your working expenses really start to come into play. Through the checklist on the state degrees, there are some requirements. Educational expenses taken out is not one, but we do expect you to have some cash on hand. Source of cash gifts is not as pertainable, but you're going to come into high school, at least with something. And so just having a little bit of a baseline and then seeing how far it goes for your ending value. On the right is where you start to kind of talk about what your SAE is. whether it be placement, entrepreneurship, research, or exploratory. And as you can see, they do a decent job of describing what their SAE is. That's another thing that we really look for whenever I'm going through all of these experience sheets. If they say that they were working on a ranch farm, it was for animal systems, but all they said was ranch hand. That doesn't exactly tell us what they were doing through their SAE that kind of contributes to the agriculture field. And as you can see in these examples, even the one in the top one for the second one down, it does say cared for plants. And for me, that's going to get a red flag just because, how did you care for the plants? That could be as simple as, oh, I went outside and watered them for, an hour a day or something like that. But just making sure that you have that documentation there that shows what you were doing through that SAE, how it was documented, and that kind of thing. And that's more for the placement side. For the entrepreneurship side, in the bottom right-hand corner, this is extremely important whenever we're looking at your expense report and your expense sheet and that kind of thing. And does it kind of match up the scope of what you have with what you say you have? So, if you own a huge cattle operation, 10 to 20 head, that kind of thing, but you're only paying for $50 a feed, that doesn't exactly correlate. But if you have, like they have in here, 37 feeder pigs, and then you go through and you see all of their entries for feed and land and fencing and all those different kind of objectives that go into that SAE, just making sure that those align, because we don't look too hard into it, but it's pretty, you can tell whenever things don't really mesh that well with their SAE and with their expense reports. And so here, what I was talking about with the current inventory and the non-current inventory, we've had some questions in the past about what is considered non-current and what is considered current. So anything on that December 31st deadline previously, that is considered non-current. And then anything that you have on hand past that date is considered current. I believe I got those right. Maybe I mixed them up. But it's pretty straightforward when you think about it. And especially whenever you're talking about them in your descriptions, if you say your very last year you had, 6 head of cattle, you were selling them off, but then you still have, so much feed left in inventory, that kind of thing is fine. But just really knowing the differences between non-current and current. And I think the next slide I have really talks about that a little bit more and further in depth too. Yeah, here we go. So these are really good resources to look at when thinking of your current and your non-current inventory. And it goes really in a lot more depth. These are actually pulled from the American degree that they have through the National FFA website, but it's still extremely relevant for the state degrees that you guys will be filling out through your AET documents as well. And so, like I said, I'm not going to read through these. I think you guys can go back and watch this and just kind of look through it yourself to see, what fits for you and your students. But these are really good resources that I found that I even use when I'm looking through and reviewing these applications too. The monetary value sheets. And I say prior because this will be the very last sheet that you come to. In the bottom right corner, you see the green METS signs. Those are all what's going to be acceptable for you to get that state degree. And that works through all of those sheets that were prior, like the summary sheets, your assets and your liabilities, your personal contribution and your net worth, and then like it comes down to this qualification check. And so that is really what AET does, and that's kind of more for them to figure out, does this align and that kind of thing. And so these, for us and for me, I look at these just to make sure that yes, everything is met and that it is passed. But if there are some questions that I have, I can always go into AET and I can go onto those little sticky notes outside your guys' state degree documents, and I can write in there whatever concern it might be for your degree at hand. So moving on to community service, this is another one that gets really hit hard by us and something that I catch a lot of. And so for the state degrees, you can see on the right kind of what the community service guidelines are. Just know that you have to have 2 that are considered different, so you can't have the same community service year after year after year. They do have to be 2 different community service that you're helping a group or organization for. And then another thing that we kind of run into is the description part. We've had some that they work what it may be like. We'll use, for example, the FCCLA organization, and they might just put rake and run, and then that's all they put. And that doesn't really tell me exactly what service was being provided to who and how it kind of correlates. And so making sure that you put on that second half, they raked leaves for elderly community members, or they went to the local nursing home and they helped however they could there. Making sure that that description is there and it's valid and it makes sense of, this is considered community service, considered to maybe it's not considered community service. And so I think that document there on the right does a really good job of explaining what is considered community service. Do what I have done in the past fall into community service and that kind of thing. Alongside that is the leadership activities. And so for the leadership activities, it'll say in that state degree, you have to have, so many leadership activities at or above the chapter level. And where we kind of, again, come into kind of some reoccurring issues is that one event or activity that you do, if you do it multiple years, it is still considered only one event. So for example, for horse judging in the bottom left, the student did it 2 years. However, that's only going to count as one activity or event because we can't count it multiple times. It's a lot like the community service. We can count, one community service, we can count however many hours you have for how many years, but you can't just use one event for your entire community service. And so as you can see in that bottom left, they do have events that they did multiple years, but they still add up to the equivalent of what you need to get your state degree. And here are the checklist of minimum qualifications. This will also be on your AET document for the state degrees at the very end. This is just another thing that I looked through just to make sure that it went through the system right, that AET found everything that we kind of needed to have. You met all those 8 levels above the chapter level. You did those 2 different community service hours, that kind of thing, which is really nice on my end too. And then the sheet on the right is what the advisors that you guys will fill out. And, you can look through it and see, have they done their 10 parliamentary procedure motions, have they done their speech? Have they done that kind of thing? What office have they held? If they've held one, what committee reports are they on? And so this one is up to you guys as advisors to fill out. And this is kind of your check to, say, yes, I've checked my student state degree. It looks good to me. This is kind of me signing off that says, this is my approval of this before it goes to the district and the state level. And so with us today, we also have the advisors from Prairie View FFA, Mrs. Bartholomew and Mrs. Burtz. And they in the past have done really great jobs with their state degree and American degree students of just being really thorough and having them work through it completely. And so I just kind of like them to talk a little bit more about their experiences. And I think Abby has a couple questions for them as well.
Hey, thank you, Ethan. Going to apologize on behalf of Mrs. Burtz. She had another conflict on her schedule, and so she's not here, but I do have notes that I can share on her behalf. And so just to kind of give you a background of what we do is we are very much an advocate for AET. We get that started right away with the kids, even up to the first week, getting them getting their information in. But in around October, we do a foundational project with them, which allows them to get a little bit more experience with AET, especially on the journaling end of it. So with that project, we have them do some career research. We have them do an interview with somebody they want to do a career with, and then they have to journal all of that information. So that gets them familiar with that, as well as then introducing them to how to put their entries in for contest participation, and then including community service. And at that time, we educate them on how it is desired to be on that state application. And so when we're talking about goals and objectives throughout that first semester, especially with freshmen, we do emphasize the degrees that they can earn and highly use examples within our chapter of students that have achieved their degrees on both state and national, and encourage them that they can easily do that as well. I'm also pretty quick to share with them that I had the privilege of sitting in on a meeting several years ago with AFA. And one of the things that I kept hearing reoccur is that if students have state FFA degree on their resume, those resumes will get a second look. And so that makes the kids perk up just a little bit, because we also work with resume development quite a bit too. So with all of that together, we try to reinforce how important it is to just keep track of what they do, and that resume component in AET as well. So it just helps make their journey a little easier through high school. My seniors are seeing it now because I've been here 6 years. Took me a while to learn AET, but at least the seniors I have this year have realized just how beneficial it is when it comes to getting their state degrees, but also their scholarship applications done. Mrs. Burtz and I are huge proponents of the three-circle model. I mean, we are old school. She has taught for 26 years. I've taught for 36. And we firmly believe in that three-circle model. And you know, I would say she believes it on steroids. She really reinforces that. And so that is something that we've worked together a little bit harder here the last couple of years. But what she has done in the past that I'd want to share in her previous school in Missouri is that she made it such a big deal about SAEs that they would, as far as proficiency awards, they would make sure they had a big slideshow. So those kids that maybe are not FFA focused, but definitely SAE focused, got a tremendous amount of recognition on the banquet, at the banquet level. And so making sure that they have pictures. And so what she also does with her classes, she predominantly teaches all the shop classes. So she makes them journal every week. They have to show progress on their projects. And then so they take pictures every week on Friday of what they've accomplished through the week. And they have to journal about it so so they can actually see their progress or lack thereof. It's on that degree. We make the rest of the students, if they're not shop students, they will do their records once a month. We'll have a day at the first of the month where they have to go through and update their entries. That just kind of keeps us from, I'm dealing with one now, which is just as much my fault, but we're behind trying to do a proficiency application and trying to get records caught up. So if they are consistently working on those, it sure makes those applications a lot easier. There's something else I was going to say, but anyway, just kind of combining all that together, they're also seeing, and I think it's being reinforced, by the time they get to be seniors, they're starting to see, after they've taken personal finance, how everything kind of comes together on keeping those good records and how that's going to help them later on. And I do want to say, I appreciate the compliment about how well our applications look, but I want to say also East Central District, we do a pretty good job at screening. And so a lot of those errors that we will have, and I'm talking about Mrs. Burtz and I, it gets caught by those fellow ag teachers. And I think that's really important to have a district that works together at that screening process and giving us those opportunities to make sure that those applications are in good shape before they get to that state level.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I think that's it. I was just kind of rattling through our notes, but
no, you're totally fine. You actually answered two of the questions that I had about what the value is for a member applying and kind of the experiences that you encouraged to get those students involved with SAEs. Another question that we have for you is, what are some different ways that you've witnessed or heard of students expressing their SAEs? So this could be thinking more non-traditional SAEs or students that came up to you with an idea and how maybe you shaped it to be an SAE, any kind of specific experiences like that.
Okay. One of the things we try to do is, and Mrs. Burtz also reinforced this a while ago before she left, but we try to have conversation with the kids about what does their daily schedule look like throughout the day, throughout a weekend. And it's amazing the little tidbits of information that you can pick up that you can say, oh, that's an SAE. So I'll give you two really outside the box that I've got. And one of the young ladies was interviewed here recently. She was big in 4-H before she came into FFA. She is definitely a non-production kind of student. Really came into FFA for the leadership training that is provided. but she does a lot of fiber art. And so it's actually making projects out of wool, out of fiber products. And I actually recently bought a scarf from her, but she has booths that she goes to, craft shows and things like that. And so we just went from there with that, and said, well, that's definitely an SAE because you're dealing with an ag product. And so she's got some beautiful work. She just set up her business. She's got a Facebook page presence. And she's not going to have quite enough earnings for this year for a state degree, but she will next year. So she's working on a proficiency application. Probably one of the most oddest and really freaky type of SAEs I had, a student that won on the state level specialty animal a long time ago, but he raised mice for pet stores to use as feeders for snakes. And then he got to where he enlarged the project, the business, to include raising rabbits as well. So we actually had a snake farm in the county. I definitely did not do that SAE visit, but I did go visit his facility that he was raising the mice in, and the different sizes that they were and the different things that they were called. And so that was really outside of the box. I've had some kids do worm farms. It's just something that a town kid could do. I'd give them old mineral tubs and they would do it in their backyard. And so then they would try to find businesses that sold worms for fishing. And so use those little containers from the food service and package those up and take those. So I've seen kids that started out welding in the shop and end up having their own side business too, bought them a welder and started doing just small repairs or small projects. So just a wide variety of things. We've got some kids that do bees. It's really about listening to them and what they do and what they're interested in and just kind of working from there. A majority of our projects, SAE projects in this area, are more placement. And we didn't really allude to it, but the ownership or entrepreneurial side of that in AT is really complicated. But so I think that's why a lot of chapters probably prefer to do a placement experience. But the ownerships is definitely worth kind of working towards. One other comment that just popped in my head, we was talking about current and non-current assets. Actually, in my freshman class, I spend time when we're talking about it in January, we starting that record book, we're doing that beginning summary, beginning transactions, and we'll talk about current and non-current. So I actually have some worksheets from Missouri Farm Management Contest where they've got to complete a balance sheet and they've got to identify what are the current non-current assets. So I teach them how to identify those and make them work 2 or 3 problems like that to help them understand that difference. And so then they actually have to do a financial statement of themselves, and then that way we can enter it into AET. Probably more information than you want, but anyway.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. I think it's really interesting to hear about, those, even like the MICE project, how different students take it different ways and can just run with it and be, state proficiency winners or even go on beyond that. So thank you so much. Those are the questions that I have for you. And if anybody in Zoom has any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat because we'll also answer them at the end of Ethan's presentation. So with that, thank you, Mrs. Bartholomew, and Ethan, I will let you finish up your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Bartholomew. That's really cool, the work that you have with all of your students. So I think one of the biggest things whenever you're getting your American degree is having a very solid state degree. And I think on the next slide, it kind of talks a little bit about that and just kind of awarding some of our state degrees from last year. But the first thing I think, again, are you eligible? The mountain that you have to get to the American degree is much larger than the state degree. The eligibility requirements are here, and I didn't compare them to the state degree because once you have that state degree, you've already obtained it, you have it, and now you're just kind of working towards that next step, which is the American degree. And so looking through here, this is straight off of the National FFA website. They have a bunch of really cool documents that are extremely helpful to not only for me, but for you as advisors as well. And so just being able to read through these, and especially looking at the hourly difference and especially the monetary difference between those and the state degrees, are two of the really biggest differences. And so I provided that hyperlink there. It'll take you straight to the American FFA degree documents and what they have, their sample documents, their handbook, all that kind of thing. So, and as I was talking, the biggest differences, it's kind of right here, what you see compared to a state degree. You can just see the vast mass of what they have for their current and non-current inventories, and just seeing, comparing this to a state degree, and what they've all invested. Now, this is obviously a very large American degree. There are definitely ones that get past that do not have this much information recorded that still get passed, and that's perfectly fine. And I'm sorry about the dates being 2014. Again, I pulled this straight from National FFA's website, but just looking at the sheer difference of what this looks like compared to the state degrees. Another thing that we kind of run into is community service. And some of the things that I hear is, 50 hours is a lot. How am I going to get there? If we don't have a whole lot of opportunities. And so one way that I really like to break it down, especially when I was going through the American degree application process, how was I going to get that 50 hours, is just thinking of it in more of a, I said reality, but in however sense that may look. For the chapter degree, it's only 10. For the state degree, it's 25, but that's just an extra 15 once you think about it after you have your chapter. And then to get your American, it's 50, and that number may seem staggering. You already have half of that done for your state degree. And so finding an extra 25 hours, whether that be on the weekends or through the weekdays or whatever it may look like, I just think breaking it down that way and explaining to students that, yes, it's 50 hours, and yes, that is a large load to take on. But once you already have your state degree, you're already halfway there. It's a glass half full kind of deal. Look at it kind of that way. And as you can see on the right, you do have to have 3 group organizations that you help instead of 2. And they do a really good job here. The only thing that I would just kind of say for National FFA's deal is just to kind of put more detail into what they're doing. Kind of goes back to what I said on the state degrees. Some of these examples, that are just 2 words, that's something that I'm personally going to flag because, high school is your group organization and you helped with the prom committee, but that doesn't tell me what you did that bona fides it as community service. And so that's just one thing whenever you're going back as an advisor, looking through your student's application, just to be aware of those kind of things. And so this is the degree review sheet. It will be on your American degree. And I think this is really on the advisor's part just to make sure to check through this list. I have a list very similar to it that I will check off as well, and just making sure that you read through all of these review areas, you check them off, yes or no, and be as honest with yourself as you can, because we really want those students to excel and want them to get their American degrees. And I want them to as well. And so I don't like reviewing them and having to send them back over just, some minor little details. And so this is really on you as advisors just to make sure that, yes, I've thoroughly read through this American degree. It has my approval. Those SAE agreement sheets are on there. And leading kind of into the SAE agreement sheet, I don't have it on here because me and Ms. Kane actually just created that document this past week. But if you run your SAE agreement through AET, it is really easy to upload and to send through. And I'm sure Ms. Bartholomew, you can say a little bit more about that as well. But for those of you that run QuickBooks or whatever it may be, to kind of document those SAEs and you don't have them through AET, we just created a form and I just sent it into the group chat as well. And it's a Google Doc that you can fill out, choose your chapter, your district, all that. And there's a place where you can upload your SAE agreement forms. That way it's a lot smoother transition. And for you as advisors, you're not stuck with, well, where do I turn in my SAE agreements for my students if we're not, going through AET. So even if you're through the YouTube or wherever it may be, we're going to start putting that link out on our website and different things like that, the way it is acceptable for you guys as well. And so that's kind of the rundown. I tried to make it kind of short and sweet. And then whatever questions you guys have, I wanted to give you guys some time for that as well.
And as we would maybe wait for a couple questions to come in, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your SAE was? You mentioned you got your state and American degrees. Do you want to share what your SAE was, to just for interest's sake?
Yeah, so I had a placement, and it was through an operation with my grandparents' farm and with my dad's farm as well, helping them in aspects of cattle, alfalfa, hay, that kind of thing. Growing up, we always had a cow calf operation, and so I was really lucky. I had, that traditional bona fide SAE placement, working under them and that kind of thing. And so that was really nice. But I didn't have enough to get my American degree. And so I started looking into other areas. And I worked for a local pioneer seed dealer. That was also another placement option for me. I really got to look into the agronomy side and the sales side for the agriculture sector and what that all kind of contributes to. That was a really cool experience that I did in high school. And then right after I got out of high school, I was going through my American degree, trying to figure out, if I could meet all those qualifications, and I couldn't again. And so whenever I went back this summer after my freshman year, I worked in the local Producers Cooperative Association at their feed store. And not only with their feed store, I went to the mill, I went down to the agronomy center, and I just kind of see everything that incorporated what that company looked like. Got to talk to local farmers, got to send seed, got to send feed, livestock feed, all that kind of thing their way. And so that was another really cool experience. So I actually had 3 different SAEs that I had to get agreed and signed off with just to meet that American degree requirement because it is such a wide load.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not seeing any questions come in here, but just kind of to tack on to what you said, I'm in the position of trying to figure out how I'm going to scrape up enough hours to get the American degree. So it's definitely a huge accomplishment and a pretty neat thing to see members accomplish. So, but I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So seeing as there are none, I just want to give a big thank you to you, Ethan, and also to Mrs. Bartholomew, and on behalf of Mrs. Burtz as well. Just thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk about state and American degrees and how important they are to our members, and also helping them and giving advice on how to make them those applications shine. It's definitely not a small task, as we were talking about. It's a great accomplishment, and so to get your advice and knowledge on the topic is just a real blessing. And so we're very thankful for the time that you've committed to this. So thank you so much. And that is the conclusion of our session here for Unpacking Opportunities. So thank you so much for joining. We are very, very thankful that you took some time out to learn how to make those applications just stellar. So you're welcome to leave. Have a very happy rest of your Wednesday, and thank you for joining.